al final lo hemos conseguido, ¿no? Al final hemos conseguido que Jade esté aquí y estamos, la verdad, todos encantados con ella y espero que vosotros también. Y nada, simplemente os dejo con ella, que le deis un fuerte aplauso para agradecerle que haya venido.
Hello everyone. Thank you for that nice introduction, although I have to admit I didn't understand very much of it. You'll have to tell me later what you said. Hopefully it was nice. Here on the right is Toronto. That's where I live right now. It's not snowing, but you can see why I'm very happy to be here in Barcelona with you. Your city is beautiful, and this is my third time here, and I absolutely love it. Fantastic people, and great sights, and great food. And as I found out last night, great gin. So you'll have to excuse me if my presentation is not quite as polished as I would like it to be. I had a giant amount of gin. Thank you for that. Okay. All right. So I consider myself extremely lucky to be working in the game industry, which is an industry that I am so passionate about. And I've decided today to share with you two main areas of technological development that I think are going to lead to major new innovations in the game industry and things that I'm really excited about. So it's a bunch of my thinking about where we're going in the future and just sharing my thoughts on what I'm excited about. Now, the industry has continued to evolve constantly. Since I was born, games have gone from this, things that required very special hardware and could only be played in the arcade, to Tekken, one of my first favorite games that I was able to play at my home console, to Resident Evil, one of my favorite games that showed to me that you could really elicit strong emotions. To now Assassin's Creed Unity and Assassin's Creed in general, which I think has been successful in fully immersing people in a historical time period and a totally different environment. And that's really what attracted me to the game industry, is the fact that we haven't found a single recipe yet for what a game is. We're constantly challenged by new platforms and new technology, advances in networks, advances in the way people can interact and the way people consume entertainment. And as game developers, we're constantly challenged to come up with something new that will surprise players and that will change the way that we play games. And that's what's incredibly exciting to me, is this concept that you have to always keep up and figure out what the game is, and that there's always opportunities for that to evolve. When I grew up, I was watching Star Trek, and I was a pretty nerdy kid. And seeing things like the holodeck made me believe that one day games would be even more immersive than the holodeck. And reading science fiction books like Ender's Game and Diamond Age also made me believe that one day games would be even more meaningful than a recent game 4-bit has been able to be. And that's what I truly believe. And that's why I continue to be really excited. Another reason I got into the game industry, this is me when I was 3, was I was a bit of a strange kid. I spent, according to my mother, a lot of time lying on the ground and staring up at the sky and not saying anything, which is very weird for a toddler. So she likes to tell a story that one day she finally came over and asked me what I was doing. And what I said to her is, "Where do cows come from?" So she looked at me and she thought I was asking a question about the birds and the bees. So she said, "Well, there's the mommy cow and there's the daddy cow." And so I interrupted her and I said, "No, mommy, where do cows come from? Where do chickens come from? Where does it all end? Where does it all begin?" And so that's when she says that she knew she was in trouble and I was going to be a difficult child. But she decided to treat my question seriously, even though I was only 3. And so she decided to explain to me different creation myths and where humans came from. And so she explained, that some people believe in Adam and Eve. And she explained that some people believe in Darwinian evolution and that they're descended from monkeys, and that other people believed that the Earth was colonized by aliens. And, what, you're laughing? That's what I believe. So apparently I listened very carefully to these explanations, and at the end I said, Mommy, those all just sound like stories to me. And so, I got into the game industry because I am a very strange kid, and that have always been strange, and I have a lot of questions, and I honestly do believe that games can help us answer some of those questions. But enough about the philosophical side. I also want to give you guys some data, because we are in the age of data, and it's always nice to have some cold, hard facts. So here's some numbers that show how the games industry has evolved. And what you can see is that all of the major innovation and changes in the game industry have come along with major innovations in platforms. And when I say major innovations in platforms, I don't just mean new consoles. I mean actual changes in technology that change the way that we play. So you can see the evolution from dice games to card games that created a huge explosion, the explosion in arcade games going to home consoles, and obviously the most recent explosion thanks to mobile games and social and the democratization of online. And those have really propelled the industry forward, not only in terms of revenue generation for the industry, but also in terms of the number of people who play games. And the fact that now games aren't just for a small group of nerds, but everyone plays games as part of pop culture. And also, these changes in platforms is what has propelled the medium forward, I think, also, and enabled us to continue to transform what games are. So as you mentioned, there is the big evolution, the most recent one that went from social games to mobile. I think I'm getting a bit too much feedback here. It's a bit loud. Can you turn it down, please? Okay, fine. Okay. So in terms of mobile, it has been a big change in terms of attracting more people to games and having more people playing. But in my opinion, on the creative standpoint, there hasn't been such a huge creative boom that I personally am so excited about. I think what passes for innovation is the recycling of 40-year-old game designs with often, unfortunately, real-world gambling and money stuck on top of it. But I do feel like there's hope, and that we're on the verge of some major breakthroughs in terms of what we're going to see. And so today I'm going to talk about some technologies that I think will lead to two major new forms of gaming that are working. So here's another chart. This is the kind of chart that makes business people happy. It shows this hockey stick that everyone goes, okay, great, we're going to make a lot of money. But I think it's also interesting to show that some of the new tech, or one of the new major tech innovations that I think is going to be exciting and important for games. And that's the proliferation of cheap sensors in the form of wearable tech and the Internet of Things. You can see that smartphones continues to have big growth and has had the growth that we already know about. But then if you look at the Internet of Things and wearables, you see that that kind of proliferation and growth is expected to be exponential from the analytics perspective. So for me personally, I'm still the kind of gamer who by far prefers sitting at a console, and that's the kind of game experience that I like to have. But the truth of the matter is, these days, maybe a bunch of the mics are on at once. Anyways, so I think actually what's happening these days is that I'm spending a lot more time on mobile games than I actually am in the home console. And I think that the reality is that the form factor is much more adapted to the actual way of life today and the reality of the way people spend their time. So the phone is always in my pocket. I can always play when I have 5 minutes free in between other things. And to me, that's the real key to the mobile success that we've seen. The fact that it's always accessible and it's adapted to people's reality of real life. And so I think with these new proliferation of sensors into wearables and the Internet of Things, what you're going to see is that extension and availability of mobile games becoming even more integrated into our everyday lives, and even more accessible and even more seamlessly integrated into the way we live. And I think, this is what I'm calling, going to give birth to what I'm calling ambient games. And for those of you who think maybe I'm crazy and don't know what I'm talking about right now, there's actually already early examples of what I would call ambient games that have over 10 million people playing today. So I'm going to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. But first, I want to talk about the actual wearables. So there's a database right now called Vendrico that is currently tracking over 233 different wearable devices. And then if you add that to the Internet of Things, there's currently thousands of these devices out there and available for purchase. If you look at that hockey stick chart that I showed before, analysts are expecting that there's going to be millions of these things within 4 years. And not so long ago, there was also a tech breakthrough when the U.S. government removed selective availability from basically the capacity to track GPS, which unlocked a whole new type of gaming. And it basically is a tech that was preventing people from getting precise GPS tracking on things and people. And this selective availability was removed in May of 2000. And from that, there was a birth of a new type of game called geocaching. And more recently, I think what's interesting is the puzzle-based geocaching. So there are currently 6 million geocachers around the world, and for those of you who don't know about geocaching, it's kind of a real-world treasure hunting. And in the last 14 years, it's evolved to integrate cryptology, strange, unused languages, narrative, and more recently, augmented reality. An interesting example of this, actually, there's a few of them out there, so if you want to look them up, there's Circada 3301, which is an extension of this kind of thing. There's Endgame, which is recently being talked about, but I'm going to talk about Ingress, which is a game that was developed by Google's Niantic Labs. And it's a game that's played out in the real world, and it integrates some of the kind of gameplay mechanics that you could maybe think of as, hacking that you would see in a Watch Dogs, mixed with a narrative layer that has some J.J. Abrams-like conspiracy that you might find in the show Fringe. But basically it divides up players into two different factions that battle over control of real-world landmarks. And there are millions of people playing this game now, and the levels of engagement are actually quite surprising. So the community is really, really engaged. And what I find interesting is it's also destroying one myth about gamers that we just are antisocial nerds who want to stay at home in our basement and not talk to anyone. So this is actually getting millions of gamers out there playing in the real world and talking together. And I think what's cool about this is that it's a first step that proves to me that we're not so far off from creating an MMO in the real world. So why not extend this instead of having two factions, having classes and cooperative play in the real world? And I think, even a very basic thing that people like to do in World of Warcraft, which is fishing, becomes a lot more fun if you're doing it around, a fountain, for example, which you have a lot of beautiful ones here in Barcelona. You could be using your Fitbit to track throwing the lure, and your Google Glass could be displaying to you and your friends the fish that you caught. Although I have to admit, before I would play that game myself, Google has got to make those glasses a little bit more fashionable. So a lot of the things going on in this space are very fitness-oriented currently. So here are some of the examples of the fitness-based wearables that are out there. I actually own every single one of these, not because I'm particularly fit, but because I'm not actually using them to get very fit, but I'm just very interested in the applications for games, so I've been experimenting with them. But currently, one of the apps, I guess, or what the apps amount to is kind of like, track, like Runkeeper, tracks your route that you took when you did a run. It's tied into social networks and you publish to friends when you did a run. and you basically get some very light, I guess, gameplay badges, gameplay awards in the form of badges that say you did the fastest run, and things like that to your friends. But I can personally tell you that I, as a gamer, would be much more motivated to go to do my runs if running around my neighborhood helped build up my walls in Clash of Clans or had some other gameplay benefits. So I think that we're on the verge of really unlocking the real potential of music. A professional football player named Chris Cooley recently gave a talk at TED, and he was talking about how augmented reality is going to change the face of professional football. So talking about, the real time orders coming in from the coach, AR display on your helmet, getting the plays in real time and all of that stuff. And I do think that's exciting. But to me, it's far more interesting to think of the consumer application of these cheap sensors going on regular basketballs or regular hoops, and all of a sudden transforming the game of pickup that you have with your friends in the local park, or intramural sports for kids at school, and all of a sudden the concept of Ultimate Team, for those of you who play that on FIFA or my team, actually being able to be played on top of your real stats with your friends. Another thing that ambient gaming is going to bring is a continuing blurring of the lines between artificial intelligence and real people. This is something that's been going on in games for a long time. I think with Burnout is probably the first place that we saw the drive avatars come to be, and there is also, obviously that in Forza, where the artificial intelligence isn't just the AI programmed by by programmers, but it's actually your friend's driving style that creates the AI, and it's integrated into your games, so you can be racing against your friends even if you're not there. Those kinds of concepts also exist in games like Dark Souls, where your friends impact your games, and that's being used to drive AI. One thing that you guys might not be aware of is that those kinds of blurring the lines of AI and your friends' behavior that's happening in games is also actually happening in real social networks. So currently, there are millions of AI bots that are out there being controlled by different people that are on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, liking things, making comments. And even though Google and those different platforms are good at detecting these bots, there are still some of these bots that are so good at impersonating humans that you guys probably don't know. You probably interacted with them already. So if you want to learn more about that, you can look into Pacific Social Architecture Corporation, which is a research division that's doing a lot of research into this field. But it's actually pretty interesting how the lines are being blurred, not only in games between artificial intelligence and real multiplayer games, but also how, in my opinion, this is going to continue to transform social networks and what I'm calling ambient. So why are people going to play these games? I think, I mentioned before there's the integration into the way that we actually live these days, the form factor of mobile, the fact that it's always with you and that it's adapted to your life. I think that's going to be even more the case with the Internet of Things and wearables. The reality is that integration into your real world life is going to continue to get more seamless and more adapted as these devices become smaller and more transparent and just integrated into the world in which we live. I also believe that there is a fundamental shift that's been happening in the last few years in the way that people absorb information and also the way people want to absorb content and be entertained. So I think we've gone from a mode in the world where we used to have undivided attention. I mean, even you can picture those images of kids in the 50s or whole families in the 50s that would gather around the radio and just listen to the radio and everyone was quiet. And that's certainly not the case anymore. I mean, right now, you'll be watching TV, you'll be on Twitter at the same time, you'll be talking to your friend on the phone, and it's no problem, all of that is just happening at once. And so we've gone from a world of undivided attention to a world of multitasking, to a world of continuous partial attention. And play has always been a way to practice real-world skills. And I actually think that continuous partial attention is a real-world skill that's going to be very important for the future. I think that in order to maximize our time that we have here on Earth, we're trying to fill every spare moment that we have with productive output or also turn the mundane into the entertaining. And that's the power that we have currently in mobile games that I think is going to be even more true with this next phase. And so, in summary for this point, the world is becoming an even more connected and densely and tightly integrated place where all objects are becoming self-aware and communicative. And not only has it become normal during our recent years to constantly at all times have access to all human knowledge, it's also normal now to be in constant communication with everyone we know. And I think very soon we're also going to be in constant communication with everything in our environment. And I think we can make that environment playable. So now for the second thing I'm excited about. So the second big group of technical advancements that I'm excited about, and I'm not just calling it one thing, is virtual reality, but even more importantly than the display technology that virtual reality is, to me it's the input technology that it implies and that's going to have to come with it. I don't know how many of you have tried VR so far. Can you put up your hands? Okay, good portion. So I think that our current control scheme is already at its limits. I think that traditional console controllers is what's keeping a lot of the mass market people from enjoying games. Controls have gotten too complicated, and it's even more the case when you're wearing VR headset on your head that the current controls just don't work. And so along with this technology, there's going to be a whole group of advancements in input technology that I'm grouping together with VR and that I find incredibly exciting. So here's a few examples of it. Down at the bottom, there's rings. Those are pieces of jewelry that can actually sense your input and where you're pointing and can be used as control devices. We have the Gamelab wrist monitor. This one you wear on your wrist, and it senses your tendons. And I don't have a video of it here, but there's a really great demo of controlling a drone by just moving your hand like this in a sensitive way, and you can fly the drone around. So that's pretty cool. Also, there's the glove. Of course, as gamers, we've seen millions of gloves, but maybe they're going to get good now. And 2D treadmills, and there's a whole bunch of things. And in fact, there's even some really exciting advancements in terms of being able to read the synaptic pulses from your brain, so actually translating your thoughts into control. And if you think this sounds like science fiction, it does. But I'm going to show you, for those of you who've been watching the World Cup, I suspect there's some soccer fans in the audience here. At the start of the opening ceremony, a paralyzed man was able to walk out and kick the first ball by using just his thoughts to control a machine that enabled him to walk and kick. And here's some consumer-grade versions of these kinds of head devices that allow you to control things with your thoughts. So I'll play that video for you.
Today's surprise was born here in a Brazilian science lab, where they're teaching the paralyzed to walk again. One of their patients will step forward at today's opening ceremony and kick the first ball.
The patient is in control of what he wants to achieve, and the machine is doing what is needed mechanically.
The chief scientist explains the patient's brain sends signals to a computerized suit that moves his legs.
This will be a jaw-dropping moment.
I hope so.
Before a global audience.
Yeah, our jaws have dropped many times in this laboratory. The first time the first patient walked here was one of the greatest moments of our lives.
So that's interesting. If you're interested in finding out more, there's actually a few years ago there was already someone who managed to play a game of pinball using their thoughts. So it's something that's already out there and been experimented with. And so I think that this, the big investment by Facebook in VR and the push that it's really here is not only going to mean advancements in VR, which have obvious impacts in the game industry, but also advancements in input and how we control games. And I find that that's super, super exciting. And I actually have my own kind of game idea that I'm really excited to do. I would love to be able to recreate parkour, the kind of thing that you have in Assassin's Creed, but in a zero-G space environment. So moving throughout space in zero-G and really experience seeing the world from above and navigating around different objects in space or around a space station, and essentially living out kind of what an astronaut like Chris Hadfield describes in his TED Talk. And to me, that's something very real and something that we could make playable and fun. And I think if we succeed in doing something like that, Richard Branson's going to see that Virgin Galactic has a much cheaper and safer alternative. So he might be not happy with that game. The other thing I'm excited about, you guys probably watch Game of Thrones, I guess. This is a good episode. The other thing I'm really excited about is that obviously virtual reality implies a very precise representation of 3D play space. And it also implies, a very precise representation of players in that space. And as a big fighting game fan, I hopefully think that this will lead to finally a good experience of melee combat in games. I also think it's going to lead to, well, actually Eve Valkyrie has a really interesting demo of 3D space combat, and I think that that's going to be a really interesting and different experience. And I couldn't resist embedding a reference to Star Trek where Spock tells Kirk that Khan is having a hard time navigating his spaceships because he's still thinking in 2D space. So I'm going to play that for you.
You followed me this far. But from where? He's intelligent, but not experienced. This pattern indicates two-dimensional thinking.
You just can't get that kind of smile, can you? So why do we care about VR? I mean, I really do believe that VR and all of this new display advancement is going to enable us to deliver whole new types of gaming experience and share new types of things. But I also think it has benefits on a cognitive level, as Spock implied there. We've long used 2D maps as our basic form of representation, as a way to communicate things that we couldn't normally see on our own. So if you look at this map of Spain, superimposed on it, you can see the roads, you can see the cities, you can see population, you can see the use of the land. And all of these things are represented quite well in a 2D space. And what really excites me is that once you have, we already are able to represent so many more dimensions of data on a simple 2D map. I like to imagine what actually living experiences out in 3D will enable us to imagine and comprehend and share. And so potentially even greater spaces beyond 3D. And I think an interesting idea that I'm going to have to credit my friend Doug Church with is, what if you could do SketchUp in VR as a shared experience with friends, which is pretty cool. And then also just thinking of a game like Megacure in VR is also making my brain melt. So in summary, there are a lot of really exciting things going on, and I think we're on the cusp of major innovation in different areas in games. Ultimately, I think this combination of sensors and proliferation of sensors are making the collective unconscious actually material and real. It means that all of these connections that we have as humans are actually becoming a very real thing. And the hive mind is actually becoming a real thing. I think when you add that to VR, you get the exponential ways to understand the world in which we live. And if you add games to that, it's a truly new way to comprehend and share those concepts. So, as another illustration of the collective unconscious, I saw yesterday that randomly, Tim Schafer also decided to reference Carl Jung, so that's a good example of it being a real thing. Carl Jung, I don't know if you guys know, is a gamer, clearly, but he had this quote that I think applies to my talk. I'll let you read it. And so I'd like to leave you with that, and also this. And I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention. I know that this was a dense talk, but hopefully hopefully it was coherent, despite the gin. And if you have any questions or, that didn't show properly, but if you have any questions or want to talk to me about these ideas or any others, I'm also on Twitter, so my Twitter handle is IBJade, and I check it every day, so I'd be happy to discuss these and other random thoughts that you might have.
Well, I would like to thank you for being here, and I have something for you I want to give you, if you don't mind.
Wow.
It's like a gift for being in Spain, so...
Oh, thank you so much.
That's
See,
your
you
name.
guys are the best, honestly.
Thank you very much.
I'll come back anytime.
Yeah, you may open it.
Oh, wow, cool. That's beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that was a question, or?
Well, that was the beginning of my question. Is Ubisoft going more for the indie games, or what do you see is the future in indie games in Ubisoft?
Well, I can't speak for all of Ubisoft. I can speak for what we're doing at Ubisoft Toronto. So at Ubisoft Toronto, we're doing a mix. We're working on some new projects that aren't announced, so I can't share too much of it, but one of them is a smaller team size, trying to do some more experimental things. And then we're also collaborating on the new Assassin's Creed and also the new Far Cry along with Montreal.
Thank you very much.
More questions?
Hello. Yes, so in your talk you talked about how new technology and new ways of computing equipment, verbal computing equipment, will enable new kinds of games. Do you think there's much future for innovation in what we might call traditional gaming equipment, so consoles, PCs, and mobile devices, other than increased fidelity and increased resolution?
Yes, absolutely. There is so much room for innovation, and I think that a lot of that innovation, we can see all over the place. But another thing I was talking about at GDC a couple of years ago is I think in terms of subject matter, there are a lot of subjects that we still could be dealing with in games. In my opinion, games are the most powerful form of entertainment or media, because on top of having the narrative side that's present in other media, you also have the interactivity, which I think you can embed much stronger messages in your games through that interactivity. So I think that that innovation isn't really or at all tied only to technology. I think that if you go along the axis of how can I use game systems to address different subject matter and different topics, I think there's tons of room to do new things, and I would love to play those games.
Thank you. Next one.
Okay. Buenas. Hello.
Hi.
You mentioned the science fiction literature, and in part of your speaking, you also talked about the advances in artificial intelligence and robotics. So my question is, actually in many science fiction books, the reason to develop robotics and artificial intelligence is that the rich and powerful can get rid of most of humanity and have more obedient servants. What would you think of this? I'm sorry.
I think let's hope that reality doesn't mimic science fiction too closely, or we're all screwed.
Hello. Live long and prosper. question is, as woman, what do you think it would be necessary to make to make more attractive video games to women and industry for women? Because it seems sometimes that it's like a male kingdom and close, but I think people don't want to be so close, but it seems like there have to be some kind of effect to evolve.
Yeah.
More near.
You mean that we need more women in the industry?
Yeah.
Both as gamers and as professionals? I think we totally agree on last
Yeah, well, I obviously agree, but I think it's not only in terms of more women in the industry. I think we need more diversity in the industry in general. And I think if I look around at one of, our game teams, and it's all white guys between the ages of 20 and 28, and they're all wearing a t-shirt and a baseball cap, I know that it's going to be hard for that team to come up with something that has vast appeal to a wide audience. I think that you have to have your team made up of people, yes, women, and people from different parts of the world, people with different cultural beliefs, and that's how you're going to get a game that truly appeals to a broader audience.
Next question.
Hi, thank you. I'm talking to you as a gamer. I've been playing 8 years WoW and 10 years Moods. And we are taking a lot of efforts in making better games for people to enjoy. So I think it's scary when I love augmented reality and VR, but how are you going to do when people are so immersed in a game? You are playing because you don't like to, you want to disconnect from real life. So I think we are going to be so well that no one is going to want to come back to reality. You know what I mean? I think that in the end, there is this kind of, it's not like problem, I don't know the word. Like, have you read Ready Player One? I don't know if you know.
Yeah.
So, mainly that's the point.
I do think that with, currently VR, I actually think for VR, the recipe is probably going to be shorter, more contained experiences. Maybe that'll evolve as the tech gets better, but right now it's not the kind of thing I think that you want to have on for hours and hours at a time, right? So it's going to be a more intense but a shorter experience than current games. And what I'm excited about for what I'm calling ambient games is, to me, that's actually a game that gets you out there in the real world, interacting with real people and in the real environment. And I think, from the early experimental things that we've seen already, they are actually having health benefits for people because they're getting people out walking around. So, I mean, I'm not saying your concern isn't there. I think, that it's something that's going to have to be considered. But I also think that there are some positive benefits too. And I think, I guess as a fan of technology, I have to believe that we're going to figure out the right recipe to make it a positive thing overall.
Okay, so like 3 more questions.
Yes.
We're ready?
Yeah.
Who else? Here. Okay. Hi.
You mentioned that you're excited about the VR technology, and I bet you have already tried in Ubisoft to put Far Cry, for example, in VR.
Oh, I never said that.
My question is if you have noticed any adverse reactions, for example, when I play a first-person shooter on the screen. I know I'm safe, but if my whole field of vision, if I'm immersed that much, does the stress come too fast, too far in the player?
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't consider myself an expert in VR, so I just have to say these are things that I'm excited about and I have opinions about, but we aren't personally, I'm not developing the tech, and I don't consider myself an expert, so I don't think I'm really qualified to answer that question, unfortunately.
Hi, here, in the middle.
Yes.
And in this forecast, as we are talking about wearables and ambient games, can comment about gamification? It means when I start getting the game not only for entertainment, but I start to motivate people not only for running, but for work. Can you comment something about that?
Yeah, I think, gamification's been a trend or a buzzword for the last 5 years, and you do see concepts that have worked in games being integrated into all kinds of things, including making people more productive at work. And honestly, as a gamer, I'm happy if everything becomes more fun and more engaging as a result of gamification. I think, if I can have a game going along with folding the laundry or something, where suddenly folding the laundry becomes more fun, bring it on. I'm happy about that. And I think before, actually, Alex Bergopoulos from Harmonix was talking earlier today, but I was at one point trying to learn how to drum. And I was just thinking, this would be so much more fun for me if if there was a game going along with it. And then, thankfully, Rock Band came out, and then I was like, this is great. But I think, ultimately, in my opinion, as a gamer, everything is more fun when you're asking my own stuff.
Okay, so last question.
Hello.
Hi.
I turned up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Hello. So my name is Carlos, and I wanted to make some sort of
Carlos.
Oh, sorry.
Hello. Ocelote.
Hola.
¿Qué tal?
¿Qué tal?
This is the best professional gamer in Spain.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, in Spain? What is it?
One of the
man.
best in the world. One of the best in the world. Welcome, Carlos.
Okay. So I wanted to make some sort of selfish question, which has not much to do with gaming, but more so with your sort of life philosophy. You've met probably through your life a lot of successful people. You're probably one of them as well. Congratulations. I wanted to ask you, well, you said at the beginning a couple of sentences regarding your life philosophy, which, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit and ask you, what do you think about, the correct, not correct, but, the life philosophy needed to sort of succeed,
Wow, that's a big question.
I know, but yeah, the thing is that you said a couple of sentences, and I was like, yeah, I want to pick her brain now, yeah?
Okay, I'll tell you what I think. Of course, everything is subjective, and this is only my opinion, so I'm sharing my opinion. But I really do believe that what you really want, and if you're really honest with yourself about what you want, and you're passionate about it, and you work hard, that you can make it a reality. And so, I really believe that, yeah, you should spend time thinking about what you want, and be honest with that, and with hard work, you can make it happen. You should set your sights high.
All right, well, that's actually, I expected some sort of that answer. Was pretty good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And by the way, I don't know if you're here tomorrow, but at 5:30, we're gonna make some sort of conference about online gaming. I don't know if you're gonna be around, but you're invited. Well, all of you are. It was hard, but for you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nice meeting you. Thank you.
So thank you once again, Jade, for coming. What I was telling before when I didn't realize I was speaking Spanish when introducing you is that most of these people for years have been asking me to bring you here. I've been trying to convince you for a couple of years, and we all are very happy to have you here. It's an honor and also a dream for all of us to have you here with us. Very inspiring talk. Thank you very much, and I hope you come to Barcelona very soon.
Thank you so much.